unlike what the program says, or at least my program says, it's not going to be a panel discussion on air quality. We've done that in the past, and it was pretty well received, but we felt like water was a much more pressing issue as you've come to hear through some of the other tracks and field trips and whatnot earlier in the week. But before we get to this track, I did want to mention that there are still 3 W-9s that we don't have yet. Without the W-9, you don't get your stipend. It's like one of those scholarships that Mike talked about that just goes unclaimed. So we're still looking for 3 now, 2. All right, I think they're all coming in here, so great. So with that, I know we're starting a couple of minutes late here, but the way this panel discussion normally works is we have Mary Jane Naquin, who's going to moderate for us. And she's been doing this, we were talking around about 20 years. So she's been with the program pretty well since its inception and really does a nice job facilitating, moderating. She'll give a little bit on her background, but she does this, she's a pro at this. Community advisory councils and CAPS, she facilitates those on a regular basis and is used to getting questions, tough questions, easy questions, and really facilitating the dialogue between people who want to know and people who are in the know. So, but I'll let her give more on her background. There are some prepared remarks that each of our expert panelists will make on the issues of water in the area. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions. And there's always a lot of questions. Some of that will spill over into lunch. So these folks will be hanging out. But hopefully most of them will be available too afterwards, getting a good lunch, and it'll be an informal setting. So if you don't get all the questions answered in this group setting here, we'll allow that to spill over into lunch. So we'll make sure that we stay on agenda, and we'll make sure you get your questions answered. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Jane. Let's have a warm welcome to Mary Jane Naquin.
Okay, so nice to see you all today. I know that you've had a good week because I've already checked with a few of you. As John said, I've done this since the early 90s, and most of the time we talked about air quality because air quality in the Houston area was a big concern. Companies that sponsored the event had issues with emissions and had to learn how to control them. Happy to say they and you have done a very good job of improving air quality here in Houston. So it's time to move on to another issue that has been looming on the horizon for several years. Texas, of course, has had a lot of dry weather in the past couple of years, and industry practices have changed somewhat because of the shale plays, and so people are asking more questions now about water. UND sent us 3 pages of questions about water. I don't know, when we did the air panel, we never really said, what do you want to know about air? Because we already had things to tell them. So in some way, you're a test case for this panel, having to do a new topic without a lot of history and things to know were important to school teachers. By way of introduction, I have 2 daughters that teach. So I know your stories and I know their stories, and I am very grateful to you for sticking with it. So thank you very much. A little bit about me. I began facilitating community advisory panels in 1991, right after they were formed by the Chemical Manufacturers Association, and under SARA Title III, which required companies who do have hazards on site to find a mechanism for discussing those with their nearby neighbors. So there are advisory panels to local industries. They're usually situated or bounded by the area or the location in which the companies function. So they're very, very local groups. You know, they say all politics are local. A lot of environmental issues and concerns are local too. So those groups, there's about 10 of them in the Houston area. I do 3 of them in Houston, 2 of them in Fort Bend County, 1 in Beaumont, 1 up in Crosby, and 1 in Louisiana. And I have original members from those years, from the early 90s that have been ongoing. So they've learned a lot about industry. They meet with plant managers, not with somebody that, you know, kind of passes the buck. They meet regularly, and we'd love to have teachers on the panels because you can't fool them. They know too much. They ask good questions. Sometimes citizens can't ask good questions, but a science teacher can. We also invite high school students to join us, so if your students ever want to have an experience of sitting with a community group that talks about health, safety, the environment, all of those quality of life issues right in their neighborhoods, they are welcome members of these advisory panels up and down the SHIP channel. I will talk to you about that after the session because this is really about water, but let me know if you're interested. I've got cards and stuff to tell you. Okay, so your questions, I think, are going to get some answers as this panel works through their presentations. The way we've set this up is each one of them will tell you a little bit about their role in water management, water issues. Gina Leathers, who's with Dow Chemical, is going to begin. She is an industry person, but she has a lot of work statewide doing working with boards. Todd Running, to my what is this? This is my left. You're right. Is with HGAC, Houston Galveston Area Council, which is the coalition of COGS. All the county governments sort of do things together because some of the, like air, water's a regional issue. It's just not in your backyard. It's connected. It's all connected. Scott Jones is with Galveston Bay Foundation, environmentally oriented, I think. Looks at wildlife, fisheries, trees, plants, birds, bees, you name it. So he's the guy for that. And on the far end, of course, if this was the air quality, this would be the air cop. So he is the water cop. This is Todd Chenoweth, who's with TCEQ. So he is the guy that does the regulation and does the legal work and makes sure that everything's in compliance. So what more could you ask for in this panel? So each one of us is going to speak a few minutes, and actually we're going to go turn it over to you. It's your meeting. They say the best to last, so we'll see if that happens. All right, Gina.
Is this on?
Yes, it is.
Well, I'd like to echo some of the sentiments that were just shared with you first. I want to thank you for the role that you play in the young students coming through the school system that are going to be our followers in some form or fashion. And secondly, to tell you that I'm completely in awe of you. I'm so thankful that you do the job that you do. And I've got a little bit of vested interest. My daughter is also a teacher. She teaches chemistry and biology in high school. So I hear some of the stories that I've heard some of you relate, and it's very interesting at times. So very glad to be here with you today. As was mentioned, I'm going to talk about at the state level from a water planning perspective briefly, and then I'm going to talk a few minutes on my role in the industry. I've been with Dow Chemical for 34 years at our Freeport, Texas facility just south of you here. The state, some of you may be familiar because we recently rolled out the 2012 state water plan, and the way that state water plan gets put together is from the 16 regional water plans that develop their plans, and then it's all rolled in together, and that's how the state looks at, from a supply and demand perspective, out 50 years, what the water situation is going to be. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on this. You can see how the state's divided up. The Houston area is in Region H. That's the water planning committee that I sit on as one of the industry reps. And then over here, I just wanted to give you a sense from the voting members that sit on that committee, the diversity of water interest groups that are also included. And this is broken into the regional level because one thing, as you begin to understand more and more about water, water is a very local item. It's local issues with local drivers that have to be addressed when you look at plans to improve, or if you're trying to close gaps. You typically are going to have to do that on a local level. You can't do a broad brush that, you know, the same solution or the same size fits all across the state. So you'll see how it's broken down into the water user groups, the population demand that's at a sub-county level, and then non-population demands are also at a county level. It's good to understand what the planning process is and what it is not. It builds upon local planning, so it takes what the local areas have identified as their needs, and then that gets folded into the water plan that is issued every 5 years. I know early when I was working on this, the county I'm most familiar with where I reside, there was some perception that the plan was to tell the local area what they needed to do, and it's just the opposite. So that was kind of a learning that needed to occur. It's coordinated across grassroots effort. There's long-range regional direction, and there's opportunity for public communication, outreach, and feedback. These meetings are open, public open meetings, so it's posted out on the webpage when the meetings occur. I don't know how easy or difficult it is to get a field trip, but that might be something you want to consider bringing your students to just sit in and listen to, you know, what goes on in a water committee meeting. Then what it's not. It's not a replacement for the local level planning. It's not a mandate to implement strategies. This is just the plan. The implementation is a whole other arm, and I know that can be frustrating to some folks. They look and say, well, you've got this plan, why aren't you doing something about it? That's not the planning committee's charter. That's in another area, and that's part of what you hear with, you know, how do you get the funding for the projects? Where do you get the sponsors for the projects? All of that's on the implementation side. And then, you know, the funding, like I mentioned, is a big item on how you move some of these plans or water management strategies forward. So the output from that I've already mentioned is a 50-year plan. It looks at demand projections, supply, it identifies the shortages, and then it develops the recommended strategies to try to close those gaps. And each 5-year plan that's put out, then it just moves an additional time period down. So you're always taking a 50-year look when you do the plan. Any of you that are familiar, if I learned how to work this, any of you that are familiar with forecasting, you know the further you move out, the more uncertainty that there comes. The closer you are into the time frame, the more you can kind of monitor and push those along. There's no mandate to implement strategies. Project sponsors conduct detailed studies and complete projects. That's important to understand that water management strategies that are included really have to have a sponsor identified for them, and then the sponsor is the one that usually takes that forward in the implementation side of things. And then the strategies must be included in the Texas Water Development Board project to receive project funding. So you've heard a lot about funding in this past legislative session. It's going to come out for a vote. If that gets adopted, then there will be funds that the Texas Water Development Board will be going in and looking at how those get distributed for possible projects at that time. So that's just a quick overview, just not having it, with the state planning system. I wanted to move in next to more of my role with the Dow Chemical Company and more specifically at our Freeport site. The drought of 2012, as for many folks, it was very different than anything we had experienced probably since the drought record, which is in the 1950s. We'd gone through dry periods before, but you know, after a few weeks or maybe even a couple months, it would rain. Not the case in 2012. So before I talk about what exactly we did to address that, I wanted to give you just a reference of where we are located. Down here in the lower right corner, that is the canal that's just before it goes into the Gulf of Mexico. We have a couple of reservoirs, and then we have a lake here, but we bring fresh water out of the Brazos River. We pump into our reservoirs. During very drought times, we are not able to use this reservoir because what happens during low flow, the seawater or salt water will begin to migrate back up the river, and we aren't able to use our pumps there. So we pump completely out this one. And I wanted to show this because this is, just before it goes into the Gulf, the Brazos River is the freshwater system that we run our plants on, and we are able to do that with water rights that are assigned over the years. But what I found out is if you're the last straw on the river, sometimes it can be very difficult to still have water there during times of low flow. So that was kind of the situation in 2011. What we did is we really brought the burning platform forward, had a call to action where we brought everyone in, as many people as we could within our operating units there, from some of our other manufacturing units, to kind of have a different perspective looking at things. We had our business people there, we had some of our executive leadership there, and we had a workshop where we went through and we basically brainstormed it. We had the business people there because they understood their processes and their technologies better than anyone else, and said, we need to figure this out collectively as a group. Here's the situation. We don't know when the drought's going to recede, so how do we identify conservation efforts that can truly impact the site? That was very successful. So much so, we've been asking the second bullet there, we've actually gone out and talked with other groups to carry them through what was the process that we went through. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't high tech, it was just bringing that brain power in that large area together. And it's amazing what people will come up with when they, are so integrally involved in the operations itself. So what are we doing now? What came out of that was basically three major buckets, if you will. One is on the demand side, one is on the storage and pumping, and then the other is on strategic direction. One thing that became very evident to everyone is that you can't look at water as always going to be there. You turn on the faucet, you turn on the valve, it may not always be there. So that was an eye-opener for a lot of folks, but having them all together, kind of in the same space and helping to solve it, it was a very productive session. So we actually had specific items, action items that we took away. And at the end of 2011, we were able to get a 10% reduction. Our demand, freshwater demand, is 100 MGD. And you take 10% of that, that's a lot. And then we were able to get roughly almost another 10% in 2012. And we continue, there's projects that we identified that we're continually working to get them implemented. So it was very successful. This is an example of where, like Jackson is a neighboring community, we were able to take their effluent. It was a 2,500 GPM additional supply that meant we didn't have to pull that out of the river. It was very easy, relatively easy. The state worked with us to get it permitted very quickly. But it was a great success of how a private public partnership can develop for the benefit. And the thing is, it reduced their cost because they were able to go back into our canal and did not have to do some additional treatment and then dechlorination, if you will, before it goes out. So they had a financial benefit with that as well. As a result of a lot of the work that we did, we received an award from TCEQ on the water conservation side. There were others too. We're very proud of this. We worked very hard, and we appreciate to be recognized for that. I'm not going to go through the next couple of slides, but I included them. These are some really good links for references. Some of these, and the one that is one of my favorite is the top one here. And let me just click over to give you a sense. That's some of the information that they have. Now you have to scroll down to get to it's alphabetical to get to the W's, but they've got a lot of good information there, a lot of information that would translate directly into the classroom in terms of very simple type projects that could be done around water and incorporate your learning principles around that. So with that, I'm trying to get through that as quickly as possible, but let me hand this off to the next one.
Good morning. My name is Todd Running, and I'm with the Houston Galveston Area Council. I'm the Water Resources Program Manager there, and I've been at HGAC for just over 21 years now. So I want to kind of get into what HGAC does for water quality. I'm going to have kind of end my bit of my presentation, talk some of the things that you and your students are going to be able to do, both inside and outside of the classroom in regard to water quality. So HGAC, we're really charged with doing assessment, monitoring and assessment of water quality in the Houston-Galveston area. And so as you can see on this slide, these are the areas that we cover in our programs. We've got 1 river and 3 coastal basins. All are parts of 15 different counties, about 16,000 miles of streams and shoreline in that area, and a population of over 5 million people. So it's a pretty extensive network of streams that we look at. All of that monitoring is done at these monitoring locations. So this is ambient water quality monitoring. It's regularly scheduled. It's performed by and coordinated with 8 local partners, plus the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the United States Geological Survey, and that monitoring is done at over 370 monitoring sites in this region. So it's one of the most densely monitored areas in the United States. All that monitoring is done at least quarterly. So you've got somebody that's going out 4 times a year to each one of those sites and taking a water quality measurement. Some of those are done more often than that. We've got some of those sites are actually done monthly by some of our local partners. And all that data is collected under an approved quality assurance project plan. So when you're looking at data, you know that it's high quality. Every one of those people that are going out into the field and collecting that sample are doing it a certain way, the way that they've been trained to do it and that it needs to be done. And all the laboratories that are doing that water quality analysis are using the same techniques, looking at the same parameters, and using the same methods that are approved by an overarching organization. And TCEQ actually goes out and makes sure that that's happening. So all that data is comparable. And then you can see we've got this large extent of professional monitoring. Also included down there are stream team. The Texas Stream Team monitoring is done in our region. HGAC is the local partner that supports that, coordinates that monitoring. And right now, those numbers here, change fairly rapidly. We've got about 92 volunteers that are out there collecting information at 65 sites. Many of those are where professional monitoring just isn't done for whatever reason. Maybe there's not anybody in that jurisdiction or a certain area that can do that monitoring. There may not be funding available to do it. In some of those areas, we've got volunteers that are out there actually collecting data on a monthly basis. So we've got all this data that's out there that's being collected year after year. Like I said, I've been involved at HGAC for over 21 years, so there's a lot of data that we've got. But what do we do with that? Every year we produce an assessment that goes over each one of those monitoring locations, all the samples that are collected. And we assess that data to determine whether or not those streams are meeting their designated uses and their criteria. Our annual report is How's the Water? And so when you get into that, it's kind of hard to see on the colors on this, but go into each one of the stream segments, the major stream segments in our area. So here's the name. I'll do Cedar Bayou at the top here, or maybe I'll do Cedar Bayou above title. This is the segment ID. And then you've got these columns here, dissolved oxygen, bacteria, chlorophyll, nutrients, dioxin, and other. And then we've got a column over here that's frog count. And basically what we do is you've got 1 frog, you've got some severe problems in that stream segment. If you've got 5 frogs, things are looking pretty good for you. So just a kind of a neat and quick way for people to do a little assessment on what water quality is like in a particular segment. The number that you'll see in this column, if there's a number here, that means that it's the percentage of stream miles in that particular segment that are impaired for that parameter. So here we've got 8.6% of the stream miles in Buffalo Bayou above tidal are impaired for dissolved oxygen. Okay, so that's true of any of these columns. If it's green, we kind of tell you where we are in the assessment process. Not only is it impaired, but is it getting better or is it getting worse? So if you've got a cell that's green, it's going to tell you that things are getting better. Things are looking up for that particular parameter in that stream. If it's red, things are getting worse. There's a problem and it's not getting any better. So you can kind of do a quick analysis for yourself of what water quality is like in the stream that you might be concerned with. And so we do that for all of the streams, 51 separate large streams in our area. So that information is available for all of those. So I'm going to kind of hit the highlights on what the big impairments are for our region. Biggest overarching one, and this is not just the HGAC region, but this is for the state of Texas and a lot of places in the United States. Bacteria is a huge problem. So just over 50% of the stream miles in the HGAC area are impaired by bacteria. That actually over whatever the criteria is, which is 126 colony forming units per 100 milliliters of water to be safe for contact recreation. That's getting in, swimming, coming in contact with that water and have the possibility of ingesting that somehow. The good news is that 26% of those streams, we're seeing reductions in bacteria. Things are getting better. Whereas 17% of those streams, things are getting worse. And you can kind of go back to that other chart and look at it and be able to determine which ones those are. Dissolved oxygen, we're talking more about how water quality impacts the critters that are out there. It's not such a human impact, but for all the fish, macrobenthics, all the critters that are out in the water, about 24% of the stream miles in our area are impaired for dissolved oxygen. News isn't quite so good. 4% of those are getting better, while 9% of those are getting worse. So we've got some issues with dissolved oxygen in the area that we want to address. Nutrients are another big concern for our area. About 29% of the stream miles in our area have a concern for nutrients. And when you hear me say impairment and concern, if there's criteria out there, then you have an impairment. If there's just a screening level, if there are really no criteria, levels that are established by the state, and we're working on those right now, you have a concern. So there's just some screening levels out there. And nutrient concerns really come in when we're talking about, of course, bacteria is a big one. If you've got a lot of nutrients in the water, bacteria have a lot of food to eat, and they can reproduce. Nutrients also become a problem when we pull our water for drinking water, taste and odor issues. If you get high nutrient levels, that can be a problem for you. And then Scott's going to talk a little bit more detail about this in a little bit, but PCB and dioxin is also a big impairment in our area. Now we don't find this at high levels in our water, but we do find it in the sediments, and we do find it in fish tissue. So if you're out there, we take a fish, we take the edible portion of that, we're finding high levels of PCB and dioxins in that fish tissue, okay? So about 25% of the segments in the HGAC area are impaired by PCBs or dioxin. The majority of those are in the tidal or bay segments, where, like I said, Scott's going to talk a little bit more in detail on that. So this is kind of a big take-home message. We've got all this monitoring and assessment data. HGAC is also involved in trying to figure out how to make improvements, and bacteria is one of our big issues. And we have actually a group that's called the Bacteria Implementation Group. And that group was formed about 8 years ago, and really looking at how are we going to improve these bacteria levels in the HGAC region. And we've had over 100 people, 100 organizations have signed letters of support and resolution for that. And basically it's voluntary options for municipalities, counties, different levels of government, and citizens that they can do to improve bacteria. Well, I think this is kind of exciting because in the area where the big is present, you can kind of see the relative bacteria levels. So in the big area, when we started this is back in 2005, we were eight times the standard for bacteria in those waterways. Over the last 8 years or so, you can see how we've dropped. So we're down about 5.5 times the standard for bacteria in those waterways. So we've made some considerable progress in some of the things that are being done, taking care of sanitary sewer overflows, wastewater treatment, picking up after your dog, those types of things have been very successful. And you can see outside of that big project area where there haven't been those initiatives, we've just kind of bounced along here at, a little over 2 times the standard. So where there has been actions taken, we've seen some real improvements. And then just kind of finally, I wanted to just show you all of this information is available for you to use in your classrooms on our water resources information map. So if you go to h-gac.com and type in water quality, go to our water resources area, this RIM, the water resource information map, is available. You can look at all of those monitoring sites, click on those, you'll get pictures of what those monitoring sites look like. You will look at all of the data associated with those locations and be able to download all that information and use it in your classroom if you'd like. You know that a lot of the students that are out there, they don't really want to sit down at the computer to do this. We also made the same type of information available for the iPhone, and starting in September, we're going to expand that to the Droid. So if you're out and about, you want to know, you're along Buffalo Bayou or Dickinson Bayou, wherever you might be, you want to know what the water quality is like in that stretch of the river or stream you're near, you can actually go in, pull up the app, and take a look at a map, click on any of those monitoring sites, go in and kind of drill down, get information. It'll give you the last monitoring data that's available for that site, give you kind of a red, green, or yellow light, depending upon whether there's a problem or an impairment or not, and then have access to real detailed information if they want to dig down into that. So that's out there, and we're trying to make improvements to that every day. It's How's the Water. How's the Water. So if you go to the iPhone store, and it's free. You can get that. And then how can you get involved? I know that earlier in the week, you had someone who was here talking a little bit about Texas Stream Team. We hope that you enjoyed that presentation and come out and be part of that. We've got a lot of teachers that are involved in that around the region, a lot of classrooms. It's an exciting project. My kids, I've got 4 of them, and they all started doing volunteer monitoring when they were in elementary school. They've done it all the way through and have enjoyed it. Participate in Trash Bash. This last year was our 20th year for Trash Bash. I know that a lot of schools are involved. There are 17 sites around the region that can participate in. If your kids are involved in Scouts, they can get their merit badges and conservation badges and things for that. There are a lot of opportunities for schools there. Practice water conservation. That's a big one, whether that's at the school or with your own families and the kids at your school, helping them find ways to practice water conservation is going to be important. And then, pick up after your pet. Pet waste is a huge problem in our area, and I've got some handouts that I'll leave for you all. But just so kind of have an understanding of the level, we've got about 900,000 dogs in the HGAC region. What that equates to a day is 52 of those really big dump trucks every day are full of dog feces, dog waste, every single day. So, that's washing, off of your yard, into the storm sewer, out into the stream. It's all untreated, and so you wonder where we get some of those really high bacteria numbers. That's one of the sources. But making people aware of that also makes them aware of the problem itself, and there are other things that they can do to improve water quality. And then finally, spread the word. As you're out there, you're talking to your classes, and you're doing these kind of hands-on science. Talk to those kids about it. They definitely take it home, and they tell their parents, tell your neighbors. That's just a big part of it. And then finally, and this is also available on the site, but I want people to understand, right now in the HGAC area, we have approximately 87,000 permitted septic systems. Those are the permitted ones. So we started to permit septic systems in 1989. So those are the systems that have been permitted since then. There are about 300,000 septic systems in this region The rest of them are all unpermitted, and we don't know where all of those are. And so if they're older than 1989, perhaps there are a lot of them that are failing and aren't working properly anymore. And so I'm going to give you, the last thing I would leave you with is we had a community in northeast Houston, and it's just outside, it's actually in unincorporated Harris County, but the city of Houston kind of surrounds it, called Westfield Estates. It's really about a 4-block area. About 79% of the septic systems in that area are not working, if there even was one. I mentioned before, 126 colonies per 100 milliliters of water is the standard for contact recreation. The standing water in the ditches in that community were 17 million. So that's completely raw sewage. That's standing, so you've got kids outside, they're playing football, whatever, the ball rolls into the ditch, and that's what you have. So we've got a lot of communities that need help and assistance in fixing those problems, and that's just one of several that are out there. So this information is available on the website. We're working with all the authorized agents to help document where some of our problems are and trying to help those people get those systems up and running. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Okay, I'll turn it over.
What county is the farthest south along the coast that y'all cover?
Matagorda.
Okay, so the Matagorda County Water Board is included in that.
Yep, we just do the kind of the northeastern portion of Matagorda County.
Okay.
And then LCRA, the Lower Colorado River Authority,
Right.
has the other
My
portion.
dad is on that water board.
Okay,
So.
great.
Another time. So we're talking a little bit now about standards and criteria. So let's go to the regulatory agency here behind the work that they do.
Good morning. My name is Tom Chenoweth, and I work in the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I work in the Office of Water for the deputy who supervises the whole Office of Water. Let's see if I can learn how to make this work. So we have a number of water-related functions that we supervise. First of all, we are interested in regulating the water quality. That's the surface waters of the states. We develop standards, we monitor the streams and lakes and rivers, we issue water quality permits, and we develop plans for implementing long-range improvements for those. So that's the water in the streams, rivers, and lakes. We also supervise all of the public water systems in the state that provide drinking water to the citizens. We want to ensure that that water is safe and adequate, and it's dependable and it's viable. And we also supervise through a state program the creation of these special utility districts that provide water and sewer service. You have a number of those in the Houston area that provide, if you don't get your water from the city of Houston, you might get it from a local mud. We also have some state programs that administer surface water rights. We also supervise river compacts, and we've got some limited groundwater programs. Now, the main, when we say administer surface water rights, we issue permits if you're going to withdraw water from a lake, river, or stream for municipal, industrial purposes or mining purposes. You have to get a permit from us. There are a few exceptions. If you're just using it if the water is on your own property and you're just using it for domestic or livestock purposes, you're exempt from getting a permit as long as you keep your use down to less than 200 acre-feet a year. So with that, I want to talk very generally about the water quality program. You've probably seen a similar diagram to this for lots of other things. If you've got a problem, what do? You gather information, you think about your priorities, you come up with strategies for how you're going to reach your goal, you monitor it and implementation of those strategies, and you begin the cycle all over again. We do the same thing at the state level in terms of water quality. First of all, we gather background information. Todd has told you about that we do it through partners like the HGAC. We also utilize river authorities, the United States Geological Service also, we tap into their data as well. So we're looking at what is the water quality conditions out there in lakes, rivers, and streams. We come up with what we call water quality standards. Not every river has the ability to really come up to the same level as every other river. So, for example, we aren't trying to make the Houston Chip Channel look like a pristine headwaters of some stream that has been very little alteration by man. So we set a standard, and those standards are numeric standards for certain criteria such as temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen. We also have some narrative criteria as well, typically for some toxic substances. Once we got our standards in place, we come up with strategies. For what we call point sources, that is typically, say, a wastewater treatment plant, either a municipal wastewater treatment plant, or it could be an industrial treatment plant from some of those facilities that we heard talk about earlier. They have to get a permit from us. They're regulated in detail about the quality of water that they can discharge. We also have these non-point sources, such as those are generalized, kind of diffuse sources where we don't know the individual source. Those could be those on-site septic systems, on-site sewage facility systems. We've a number of other ways that pollutants can get into the stream. Generally, stormwater is considered a non-point source, and as well as agricultural runoff, other types of runoff. So in terms of strategies, we have the voluntary strategies typically for the non-point sources, and then for the point sources, we have that permitting. And then we monitor and track, again, through the water quality monitoring to see what is, how we're doing. If the segment is not meeting the standards, and it's called an impaired segment, then we develop a specific strategy for that impaired segment. It has something we call a total maximum daily load, and that's really, we're trying to figure out how much of the bad stuff can go into the stream so that there's still no water quality standards, so we know numerically what our targets are. And then there's an implementation plan coming up with ways for us to meet those targets. That could be ratcheting down on permits, allowing them to discharge less pollutants, and as well as programs to address the non-point sources. And we begin that process all over again, and that in 60 seconds is our water quality program. I'm going to talk to you about our drinking water program, but I'm going to talk, and our surface water permitting program, but I'm going to talk to you about that through the lens of the current problem that we have, which is the drought. It takes up a lot of time. We put a lot of routine work on the back burner in the TCEQ so we can address the drought problems. And we get these maps every week or so. And this is a relatively recent map. The latest map doesn't look a whole lot different than this. We get this is a combination map that's put together through the National Drought Mitigation Center. And it utilizes a number of sources of information. And you can see the red is obviously the more intense drought. We use this as a general indicator to tell us where we need to do extra outreach to public water systems, where we might start to see problems. this kind of, and as well as monitoring when we might see a little bit of relief. But as you can see, we're still in a bad way through much of the state. We're really concerned about the next couple of months. This is a NOAA map that we also use. This is a kind of a forecast for from right about now through mid-October, or the end of October. And as you can see, NOAA is not expecting us to improve much through much of the state. Okay, so we're very proactive in our drought response. We do a lot of communication with the water right holders, legislative officials, state leadership, as well as local water and wastewater utilities. We're constantly reaching out to them through a number of different ways, trying to figure out who is having a problem, who is getting into a worse situation, who may be about to run out of water if they don't get some relief. And we provide a lot of different types of assistance. We do workshops, water conservation plans, drought contingency plans. We get a lot of, especially small utilities, they have to have a drought contingency plan, but some of those folks just kind of put it on the shelf. We remind them about that. We talk to them about what they need to be doing. If there's some way that we can help them implement their drought contingency plan, we certainly provide that assistance. So our outreach to the public water systems, we come up with a priority list of folks that are having problems. The assistance we provide can sometimes be financial assistance. We don't provide money ourselves, but we tell them about ways to access public assistance and other folks' money. We help them. Sometimes it's just a question of management, as well as technical assistance. And there are things that we can do as a state regulatory agency where we can assist them. And a good example of that, I think, is the example that you just heard about with Dow Chemical, where they went out and identified that they could use some wastewater from a local municipality to use as their process water. Well, that required a permit from the TCEQ. It's somebody that really needs assistance that's going to help them in the drought. We move that permit up to the top of the pile and we expedite those types of permits. Other types of permits that we see, a public water system may have a well collapse. That may be half their water supply. Hopefully it's not their whole water supply. The new well has to get approved by us. That goes to the top of the list. A lot of times, especially in an urban area like the city of Houston, there can be some emergency interconnects. Sometimes those have to be approved, sometimes not. If it does require an approval, we certainly expedite those. Some folks are looking at innovative and alternative technologies. We're seeing more folks that are interested in wastewater reuse. There are some technical issues associated with that, and we are looking at ways that we can expedite that process, but at the same time maintain a high level of protection for the public health. So there are folks that are looking to use what in the past they're looking to use brackish groundwater, very salty brackish groundwater. In the past, folks would say, well, it's too brackish, it would be expensive to treat, I'm going to look for other options. Well, those other options are running out, so they're looking to utilize that brackish groundwater. That requires a very sophisticated reverse osmosis technology to really knock those salts down, and that's approval of those plans is more than your typical conventional water treatment plant plan. We're trying to find ways to expedite approval of those plans while still maintaining protection of public health. And then we also administer water rights. We not only issue the permit for a water right for surface water, but in Texas, the water rights are issued with a priority date. This is the system that's used in the western United States where water is scarce. And the catchphrase is first in time, first in right. So if you're working under a water right that was first issued in 1950, and other folks are utilizing water from the river and they got their permits in the 60s, if water gets short, the system, the way the system is supposed to work is that the person with the 1950 water that's not getting their water can call us up and have us curtail the people with the 1960s water. So they have their water first, they're supposed to get their water first, regardless of whether they're upstream or downstream. That's the theory. In practice, it's a lot more difficult. We work with those issues. One of the folks that has asked us to do this recently and in the last several years is Dow Chemical. And we have been doing that, which is, but there are a lot of practical issues to work out. For example, if somebody is way far upstream, if you turn them off, you aren't going to see the effects of that water necessarily getting downstream to the people with that you're trying to get the water to. Simply may evaporate first. So there's a lot of monitoring of the water, of the situation, who's diverting, when are they diverting. We also try to work out systems where sometimes just everybody's trying to take their water at the same time. We can do a river equivalent to odd even watering days. So some folks are taking their water on some days and then curtailing their water use, and the other people get to divert during those times. Okay, so we're also, I've already discussed this, people are looking at different ways to come up with additional water supplies. We do have a number of systems that, well, for the last 10 or 15 years, more and more municipalities have been taking their wastewater from their municipal plants, and instead of discharging it to a stream, they have thought of ways, alternative ways to utilize that. So instead of taking fully treated water and watering the municipal golf course, for example, they take treated effluent and water the municipal golf course. This cuts down on a lot of fully treated water being utilized. But we're starting to see folks that want to take that water and utilize it as a drinking water source. The city of Brownsville has got a project like that. There is some group of cities out in West Texas. They're blending the water, and we have some cities up in the northern part of Texas that are really looking at that and actually, so there are some health-related issues that we're really some of the first people on Earth really that are going to look at some of those systems. We've got a system up in Wichita Falls that really is going to be the first system that we know of other than one that's in Africa that will be utilizing wastewater effluent to the extent that they're using. I've got a few slides anticipating some of your questions, general information. This is from the state water plan, and if we go over to Whoops, I hit the wrong button. Boy, howdy did I hit the wrong button. Oh, I'll get it. Here we go. All right. Maybe if I can get the right one. Okay. We're over here, and you can see, big picture, state of Texas, who uses the most water? It's agricultural irrigation. Who uses the second amount? That's municipal. And then you've got manufacturing down here, and you can see the trend. Municipal is anticipated to be using more and more water. Agricultural, slightly less. Others will grow in demand, but not as much as municipal demand. Some folks have some questions or are interested about water use in fracking operations. Fracking would be in this chart under mining, which is down here, but that includes not only fracking, but that includes all of your oil and gas operations. So water to drill the holes, as well as any water used in surface water, surface mining, lignite mining. All of that is included in that figure. And it's not expected to grow that much. On the national level, EPA and USGS has been looking at this issue, and you're right, every individual well, if you look at it as an individual well, looks to take up a whole lot of water. In the Barnett Shale area in Texas, we know that it takes about 10 acre-feet of water. Acre-foot of water is the amount of water covers 1 acre, 1 foot, 358 some thousand gallons, up 10 acre-feet. It's a bunch of water, but collectively, when you look at the use of municipal water and agricultural water, it's really less than 1% of the water we use is utilized in fracking. And here's my link page. If you want to find out about the drought, at the TCEQ website, you can go there. You could just go to the tceqtexas.gov site. That's our main web page, and drought is highlighted in there, so you can get all kinds of additional information. If you're looking for surface water quality and you happen to be out of the HGC fancy app area, you can go to the EPA's website on Surf Your Watershed. A similar website is there for drinking water, but I tell you, if you're interested in the quality of your drinking water, every utility once a year has to send out to all its customers its consumer confidence report. A lot of good information there. Most of the utilities have posted that on their websites as well, so you just Google your utility and consumer confidence report. The City of Houston has an excellent report out there. And the water plan has lots of information, not only on strategies for your area, but things like who's using the most water, what kind of, how much of the water we use is from surface water, how much is from groundwater, and that plan is available on the web as well. And that concludes my comments.
Okay, and our final speaker is Scott Jones of Galveston Bay Foundation. Someone who represents the environmental perspective on water. So we'll see what Scott has to say.
Right, I've been trained on the remote, so now I'm ready to go. I'm Scott Jones. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the Galveston Bay Foundation. And Galveston Bay Foundation has been around since 1987, so I guess we're in our 26th year, if I can still add. And the Galveston Bay Foundation, our mission is to preserve, protect, and enhance the resources of Galveston Bay for our current users and for future generations. And we work with everybody, and just from listening to the panel, listening to your questions beforehand in your prior sessions, it's going to take a lot of cooperation from everybody that needs water, no matter the user. Everybody that enjoys Galveston Bay, we're all going to have to work together to try to meet these challenges. And now with drought, certainly with water, so it's going to take some innovation. So these are interesting times we're living in right now. I'm going to tell you about Bay-specific, some water quality and water quantity issues, mainly freshwater inflows, because our bay depends on fresh water for what it is and what it can produce. So with that, let me jump right in. So I'm going to talk about, you've heard from Todd about some of the water quality issues in our region here, and Galveston Bay is part of that. In this map that you see, basically where there's red, as Todd showed before, I think on his map, where there's red, there's problems. The stream or the water body, bayou, creek, lake, or the bay is not meeting its standard. There's designated uses, as Todd mentioned, and you're supposed to be able to get fish and crab out of many of our waterways, most of them. And the problem is in the Houston Ship Channel, Buffalo Bayou area, the San Jacinto River, and then upper Galveston Bay, this map shows that those water bodies have problems because of the presence of toxins in the tissues of fish and crab. And in particular, we've got issues in this area because of dioxin, which is a byproduct of the paper bleaching process in our paper mills. When you bleach the paper, you use chlorine as a byproduct. You create dioxin, and dioxin is a really bad toxin. It can cause all sorts of illnesses, acute and chronic. It's a big problem for the unborn. It's a big problem for women who are nursing their children because it causes developmental problems in us, and it causes different illnesses. So dioxin, that's one big source, at least in our area, and I'll show you an example of one of the sources of the dioxin. Dioxin is also produced when you do household burning. That's a big contributor to dioxin. Anything that goes up in the air can come back down in the form of atmospheric deposition of pollutants, and dioxin is one of those as well. It's a byproduct of combustion. So there's different sources of it, but it, like the other toxin that we have an issue with, which is polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs, that's also what we call them legacy pollutants, because PCBs are no longer utilized here, or no longer produced here in the U.S., but you find in the environment because they were used as used in industrial processes, used in transformers. They got very good insulating properties. But like dioxins, PCBs are also very toxic. And so in these waterways up here, and I'm not going to try to get Todd here and get his eyes, the Houston Ship Channel, upper Galveston Bay area, we do have a problem with it. And so different species of fish and blue crab do have those toxins. And I always get ahead of myself on slides, but I've mentioned this. These are legacy pollutants. You don't see a bunch of new sources of these pollutants, but these types of toxins, as Todd mentioned, you don't find them in the water. They're not very water soluble, but they do cling to sediment and clay and silt particles. That's how they get into the environment. From there, you got the bioaccumulation process, with the little critters eating them and so on, and you move it up the food chain. So people always ask, am I going to touch the water? Am I going to get sick? So the answer is no, not from dioxin and PCBs. It could be if you ingest the water and there's a lot of bacteria, but you get it through, in the case of dioxin, which we've been working on closely, and you'll see in a minute, the dioxin, you can get it through direct ingestion of some kids playing around in the mud, and they get the sediment on their hands. That sediment's got the toxins, and then they digest it. There's also dermal absorption, if you get it on your skin. But the main one is when you eat tainted fish that has that. So that's where it comes from. And so there are advisories in the Galveston Bay system, but there's good news. Now, these advisories go back a long time, but look, show me your hands if you know about the seafood advisors on Galveston Bay. Exactly, that's the problem. All of us, I said, we're all in this together. There's not much funding for monitoring enforcement. There's not a lot of money to have all the folks we need at TCEQ and the other agencies to take care of some of these issues, much less for the Texas Department of State Health Services to go out and then do outreach on what the advisories are. So it's hard to find out about them. You can only find out about the advisories if you really look. If you happen to look at the 2 sentences in the Texas Parks and Wildlife Fishing Regulations that are buried in the little booklet, you're just not going to find out about it. So that's the issue. But these advisories have been around for a while. This advisory up in the upper Galveston Bay area was issued in 1990, and that was because of dioxin found in certain species of fish and blue crab. And then there was more, but let's just fast forward to now. There is an advisory on the whole bay. Thank goodness. It's not good we have it, but now it's only on all species of catfish. That just changed last month. Up until last month, there was an advisory on the whole bay for speckled trout. Spotted sea trout, extremely popular species. A lot of people eat them. I've eaten a lot of spotted trout out of the bay over the years. So, but now you got an advisory on the whole bay for all species of catfish. So that's like hardhead catfish and gaff-top catfish. And then, you know, there's blue catfish and channel catfish when it gets fresher in the bay, which hadn't been in a long time because of the drought. You can get those species of catfish too. Once you go up further into the bay system, this little area, let me go ahead and fast forward, move to this one. I wanted to zoom in. First, again, let me get you oriented real quick. Here's Houston, we're about right over there right now. Galveston Bay area, Galveston. And so this is the upper bay. If you know where the Fred Hartman Bridge is, the big bridge that goes over the ship channel, basically from the Fred Hartman Bridge upstream, the advisory is on all species of fish and blue crab. Once you get down between the Fred Hartman Bridges, and this is the brand new map that just came out, and I don't know if you can see the difference, but from here to here, this little area, it's not all species of fish anymore. It's speckled trout or spotted sea trout, all species of catfish and blue crab. And so just keep that in mind when we go forward. The language, if I can make this work. Okay. So the language, keep in mind, you just have to kind of think where you are in the bay. No matter where you are in the bay, the advisory language from the Department of State Health Services, it's not a ban, it's not a prohibition, but it says women who are of childbearing age and children under 12 don't eat any of the listed species of fish or listed species. So if you're down in the Galveston area, it's just going to be on catfish. If you're up in up by the San Jacinto Monument, it's going to be for all species of fish and blue crab. If you're in that little in-between area, it's going to change. So that's the big one. I mentioned that those toxins are really, really bad for development of brains, development of organs. Of course, these can also cause cancer. So it's women and children that are at most risk. And then for women past childbearing age and adult men, the advice is to don't eat any more than 8 ounces per month. So that's 1 seafood meal per month, basically. So those are the advisories, and I know one of the questions was, what do people know about that they don't know about? People need to know about the seafood advisories. Now keep in mind, this is all done on a risk analysis that the Department of State Health Services has to do, and they have to do lots of risk calculations and risk factors, and that's where they come up with the amounts to eat. And so they're trying to be very protective. But the main thing is we got to get the word out to folks. Okay, so these are legacy pollutants. There's different sources, but one source is this is the San Jacinto River. Again, this is the San Jacinto Monument right here. Here is the San Houston Tollway. Here's I-10 where it crosses over the San Jacinto River. On the west bank of the San Jacinto River, just upstream of the bridge, there's an old waste pit. It's called the San Jacinto River Waste Pits. This site is thought to be the source of about 60% of the dioxin that's in the system now, whether it's in the sediments or in the seafood. This is what it looked like in the 60s when they were operating. again, it wasn't I-10 at the time. And it looks like they're just doing a lot of building right there. This is the pit, and again, this is from bleaching paper. And the paper mill waste was barged around, and it came up the San Jacinto River. The barges would come up in this area, and they would pump out the waste into these pits. And there was a couple cells, and basically it would decant, but it wasn't keep in mind when this was happening, this was before we had a lot better practices. And so these pits were here, there was no liners, modern liners or anything. The problem is, and this is one of the questions we got about what's happened to the land around here and what do we use for sources of water. Well, everything sank. So this was in the 60s, this is present day, and I know it's a little hard to see, but those are the pits. About half of them are underwater. About half of them have been underwater since the 70s. So that dioxin was getting out and getting into the system for a long time. And then in addition, there was a sand mining operation that dug into one side of the old berm right there. And I'll just tell you right now, this is now under the Superfund program where it's got federal oversight and it's being cleaned up. Well, anyway, this is what it looked like when it was just discovered in 2005. So this is actually the waste right here. This is a trail where people will come fish. So you can imagine little kids were standing right on that. People were standing on it. People were fishing. People were exposed to it. The good news, now this is a Superfund site, it's been temporarily capped. So if you, whoops, what did I do there? Okay. So if you're driving over I-10, this is going towards town. If you just pass the San Jacinto River, look to your right and you'll see an area with boulders. Those were the waste pits. It's no longer a little island where people went out and fished. So that source of the dioxin has been removed, thank goodness. Okay, so that's one source of dioxin. There's other sources. There's Patrick Bayou up the ship channel, which is a Superfund site for a bunch of different reasons. We're going to find more sources, but that's one at least we're working on. Keep in mind, this is going to take a long time to remedy. Once that stuff gets in the system, it's very persistent. It's going to last for decades. At least we know. So that's good. Okay, so that's a real quick shot at some toxins, and we can have questions on any of that stuff later. Freshwater inflows. Todd Chenoweth did a nice job on talking about the drought and talking about the permanent system. And these are all important uses of water, whether it's mining or industrial or municipal for our drinking water. But wildlife and the environment is also an important use. And Galveston Bay is an estuary, and an estuary depends on that fresh water. It's the lifeblood of an estuary to mix with that salt water, to bring in the nutrients, to bring in the sediments. And so we're at the end of the tap. There's different users like Dow, they're toward the end of the tap. Galveston Bay is definitely the end of the tap, as are all the other estuaries in the state. And the issue is most of the water in our rivers in the state has already been appropriated. These water rights have gone back to the early 1900s. And at that time, there wasn't really much thinking about the environment. That was just the way we did things. And those were really good uses for the water, and they still are today, but we don't really have that much water left for the environment. So we're going to have to find a way to have water for people and the environment. It's going to take, and the necessities of mother invention, it's going to take a lot of that. So keep that in mind for your questions. The Galveston Bay watershed, this is 24,000 square miles going past Dallas-Fort Worth. It's half the population of the state lives in our watershed. We need that water for people. We also needed to get down to the end of the pipe down here to Galveston Bay. National Wildlife Federation did a report back in 2004. Basically what they said was by 2050, if the population grows like it's supposed to, and then if we utilize the water rights like we think we will because of all that extra demand, and you saw how Todd showed that municipal demand going up, that's the population growth. If that happens, and then we start reusing that water, which is a great idea, but it doesn't get down to the bay, a lot of the bays are in danger. Pretty much all the bays on the Texas coast are in danger with the exception of Laguna Madre, and then because it's a lagoon. It's not normally, it's normally very salty. But Galveston Bay is in danger. And a big issue is our oysters. The oysters are a keystone species in the bay. They provide habitat, they filter water, And then they're a big commercial fishery operation. So the oysters can't move, and if they don't get the water, then they're really prone to disease and predators that love salt water. So that's the issue right there. So we're really worried if we lose the oysters, that could really change the productivity of Galveston Bay. So that's what we're facing. Todd talked about the process. Basically, there was a great thing that happened back in 2007. There was a bill that was passed that said, hey, we got to figure out how much water needs to come to the bays. We all realize the bays need water. So there was a whole process where scientists looked at the issue and they tried to come up with some standards for how much water needs to flow to the bay. But then also the different stakeholders, the agriculture, municipal, environmental, everybody came together. And as a result, TCEQ was given some recommendations, and they had a tough job because, especially here in Galveston Bay, because there was 2 competing recommendations. They had to take all that and come up with standards. And the standards ended up coming out as basically a schedule of how much water you want to come to the bay in different seasons. And we had an issue with the standards for Galveston Bay because there were no standards for the fall. And then there was no standards for the drought time, when things get really bad and when the oysters are at their most risk and the whole biota of the bay is at most risk. There was no lower level saying how much water needs to come, what's the minimum amount of water that needs to be in the bay 90% of the time. They didn't have that criteria. So that's where we are. And as I mentioned before, and I truly believe this, we're all going to have to work together to figure out what to do going forward to try to make sure we have water for people and the environment. So that's going to take all of us conserving. And we can talk about that here when we do our questions. So that was a very quick down and dirty of some water quality issues for the bay, and then also for making sure we keep fresh water. If you go to our website at galvbay.org, scroll down the left, you'll see in red, you'll see seafood advisories, and you'll see freshwater inflows. And we just updated the seafood advisories, at least the English page. We're updating the Spanish page to show the new advisory. And again, that was great news that speckled trout were removed from the advisory for the whole bay. Maybe we'll see some process. I know we're going to see progress. We're going to find more sources, but we'll get this stuff cleaned up eventually because we're getting better as we go on. So that's really it, and I think it's time.